What about kids? I'm curious in your experience, like kids who experience this in childhood from their parents. And so they're being set up to, right, not necessarily have great self-esteem based on all of that. Do you see their self-esteem being impacted in a different way because they're still right in development? Any thoughts?
Um, well, I'm not sure that it's so much different, but you're correct. I mean, often, we're sort of talking about, I think, sort of in adulthood, people are thinking about, is this really a process of, reestablishing self-esteem that I have lost? Or is it, I never really had very good self-esteem, and so I'm really starting from the bottom. Um, and I think it's important, and yet at the same time, I'm not sure that the process is entirely different. It's generally, if we're sort of going back to something that we once had, it's a little bit easier than it is when we're starting from scratch. And the other thing is, that can make it difficult is when we have these experiences when we're young, we don't, they can be more impactful. I don't want to diminish the effects of being in a narcissistic relationship as an adult. Definitely, that can do a tremendous amount of damage. But for children, they also are lacking, the life experiences and the cognitive functioning that we have as adults that can help us maybe moderate some of those effects. They don't have a lot of resources in terms of a social network that they might be able to go to. Maybe as an adult, you've got some family or friends that can, help again, sort of buffer some of these effects, or help you move along through the recovery process. Children, they're kind of at the whim of their parents, and if their parents are the people who are are doing the abusive or destructive behaviors to them, that's hard for them, of course, to get away from that until they are older and have access to more resources and knowledge and even thinking skills.
Yeah. And then, right, some of those now adults are dealing with their parents still and right, haven't really rebuilding self-esteem for themselves while also, managing those relationships as adults. So let's talk about rebuilding. How do we rebuild our self-esteem after narcissistic abuse? What kind of things can people do?
Yeah, so I have sort of broken it down into 5 different pieces that we might look at. And those are self-care, trusting yourself, standing up for yourself, for being assertive, knowing yourself, and then valuing your feelings. I think for, our purposes today, that's plenty for us to cover. There are probably other things that we could include here as well, but we want to also keep things manageable for people and not have it be a list of 20 things that you need to focus on. And even within this, I would say, find a piece that feels like a place for you to start. We don't want to feel like we need to do everything all at once and overwhelm ourselves with trying to make too many changes. I tend to say this a lot because I really believe it, which is, sort of recovery or self-improvement. It's not an all or nothing situation, that even if you can do a little bit of the work, you will see the benefits. And even if you don't sort of get to all of it ever, that doesn't mean it wasn't worthwhile. I think sort of that incremental change can be very meaningful. So why don't we just go through these a little bit and maybe talk about what they mean for folks and think about how they could start doing them.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, so self-care is probably, the simplest. I don't mean that it's necessarily easy to do, but it's sort of straightforward in the sense that I think most of us have an idea of what that means. And the reason it's important to be more intentional about doing things for yourself, to care for yourself, and this can be, for your physical health, your mental health, spiritual health, your social, your relationships, any number of things that are essentially for your own well-being. Part of that is, that's obviously, it's important for us as people, so that we can be healthy and happy. But it's also important because when we do it, especially with that intention, it's sending the message to ourselves, right? And our idea here is in rebuilding our self-esteem is that you're telling yourself that you matter, essentially, that it's worth it for you to spend the time or the money or whatever the resources are on yourself. And again, you can think about, a time when, maybe you have thought that wasn't important, that you weren't worth that time, or, you put yourself at the bottom of that to-do list. And again, this is a process. So you want to just maybe think about, one or two things that you could do to take care of yourself. And maybe even as you're doing them, be actually saying to yourself, I'm doing this because I'm a good person. I'm a valuable person. I'm worth spending this time on. My health matters, whatever, kind of resonates with you. But again, we're kind of reinforcing that idea of the self-esteem, trying to establish some of that thinking like, okay, I am a valuable person. And again, it's not like we have to do anything to earn the self-care. It's just something that we do for ourselves because everybody should take care of themselves.
Right. Yes. And I'm glad, I love you mentioned, right, that this is like us doing various acts of self-care, right, sends the message that you matter, right? We're behaving in ways that indicate you matter, you're worth it, you're valuable. I love that is.
Yeah. I mean, and depending on where people are at with their self-care, I don't think people even have to, add some radical new self-care practice. I mean, I think if you're doing like fairly well with your self-care, maybe you've even recently established, a new self-care practice or something like that. Like, for example, let's just say if you're somebody who had a tendency to skip taking an actual lunch, and maybe you'd either not eat or you'd eat at your desk or something like that. And, if your self-care practice is like, I'm going to take 20 minutes and, eat and just do that and sort of enjoy that time. You can sort of just add on to it the I'm doing this because I matter piece. And I think that can be helpful because, again, that we're trying to get our brain thinking about ourselves in a different way, so that we can align ultimately the way that we think and that we feel and that we act are all, sort of sending the same message to ourselves and to other people about our value.
Mm-hmm. I love it. So what about trusting ourselves? This kind of wraps into what we talked earlier about in the world of gaslighting and how that can affect that. So how do we practice trusting ourselves?
Yeah, it can be a tough one because it's sort of a nebulous, idea of trust. And we have to think about, well, what does that look like if I was trusting myself? So one thing that I think that we can do to at least get started with this is the idea of thinking about how you can really be there for yourself. How can you fulfill the commitments that you make to yourself? Because this is, at least one aspect of trust is, if I trust you, I know that you're going to do the things that you say you're going to do. And, most of us, are probably better at being consistent and sort of being there for other people than we are for ourselves. And what we want to do is make sure that if you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to take that 20 minutes for lunch, that you actually do it. Because if you don't, right, then you start to say, the message, you're not literally saying, but the message to yourself becomes, I'm not really that important, right? I can't count on myself to do things. I can't count on myself to be there for myself. So you want to think about something that you are like 99.9% sure that you can actually do, because we don't want to set ourselves up to not be trustworthy for ourselves, right? So you want to start with something that's small, and it may feel like it's so small that it's like, why am I even doing this? But again, it's the intentional piece of it that I think is important here. So that, you want to say to yourself, I'm going to do this for you. And then you want to make sure you really can do it. So don't, pull off some, grandiose thing that is going to be really difficult to do. And then you might not be able to come through for yourself. That doesn't mean you can't get there, but, I would suggest, do the baby steps to get there so that you are establishing for yourself that you are there for yourself and that you will come through when you really need yourself to, right? I mean, it also may sound to people like, well, what does this have to do with, really being there for yourself? But again, it's starting to set that stage that, when the really important stuff comes, when I really need to be there for myself, I need to have this practice established, not the eating lunch per se, but the idea that I am going to come through on the things that I commit, and tell myself that I can do, and recognizing that matters.
Yeah. It's like the thing that comes to me is like setting ourselves up for success. So we're, yes. Okay. Got it. That was an easy success. I did what I said I was going to do, and you can kind of build from there. So,